The barbed wire camp in Texas lay under a hard noon sun, its watchtowers rising above rows of weary men in faded gray uniforms. Dust swirled in the yard, and the silence was broken only by the creak of boots and the coughs of men who had marched too far from Europe to America. Then came the moment that would ignite the laughter, the kind of laughter not born of joy, but of ridicule and disbelief. A U.S. guard stepped forward carrying something that looked almost absurd, a small, folding shovel, compact and neat, its blade glinting in the light, for the German prisoners. Hardened by years of digging trenches from the Don to the Seine, it was comedy in metal form. They looked at one another, eyes narrowing, lips curling, until the campyard erupted in mockery. One prisoner, a corporal from Saxony, shouted across the yard, his voice thick with scorn, "What is this? A tool for children at the seaside." His friends roared. Another, mimicking a child scooping sand, crouched and pretended to dig, sending bursts of derisive laughter echoing through the barbed wire enclosure. The guards stood still, their faces unreadable, leaning casually on the very tools that were being mocked. The Germans had reason to believe their laughter. They carried memories of shovels forged in the workshops of Solingen, heavy and indestructible, designed to carve trenches into frozen soil and rubble alike. In their eyes, this short, folding contraption was no more than a toy, flimsy, laughable, incapable of standing against real earth. Even the officers joined in with quiet derision. One of them, a lieutenant who had fought at Kharkov, muttered to his men, "American soldiers must think war is a picnic." His words carried weight, for the men remembered their own grueling labor on the Eastern Front, the bitter winters where every inch of trench had been bought with sweat and blood. A real soldier's shovel, to them, was as sacred as his rifle. And yet, beneath the laughter, there lingered the faintest trace of unease, though none of the POWs would admit it aloud. For if the Americans carried such toys, what did it say about their confidence? Did they not fear ridicule, or did they know something the Germans did not? The campyard settled into a tense rhythm, laughter above, silence below, the sound of metal folding into place like a question waiting to be answered. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. And tell us, as we open this story, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it in your corner of the world? Night had fallen over the barracks, and the German prisoners still murmured about the strange sight from earlier. The little American shovels were a joke too rich to leave behind. Pride made their voices louder, memories sharper, as though they were trying to prove to themselves that tradition was stronger than doubt. For these men, the word schaufel carried weight. It was not simply a tool. It was a badge of discipline, an emblem of their campaigns. They remembered the frozen plains of Russia, where trenches had to be hacked from permafrost under artillery fire. They remembered Normandy hedgerows, when every shovelful of dirt meant survival. And in those places, it had been German steel, long, heavy, unbending, that carved the earth. An older sergeant, once a miner in the Ruhr, tapped the side of his bunk as though striking iron. In Germany, we forge tools the way we forge men, long, solid, built to last. His words drew nods, and even a few fists slammed against wooden boards to punctuate his point. The shovels they had known were extensions of themselves, as rugged as their boots, as stern as their officers. One lieutenant, who had survived the carnage at Stalingrad, leaned forward and spoke with theatrical pride. "We dug positions under Russian snow, chest deep, with real steel in our hands, not with toys that fold like pocket knives." His men chuckled, the sound brittle and proud, clinging to the memory of strength as if it could ward off humiliation. They could picture their tools vividly forged in Solingen workshops, steel tempered by centuries of craft, handles polished smooth by calloused hands. A German shovel was more than a blade. It was a symbol of engineering discipline, the embodiment of order against chaos. The contrast only deepened their contempt. American soldiers, they said, lacked tradition, lacked history. Everything about them seemed too new, too convenient, too eager to sacrifice craftsmanship for speed. The prisoners whispered that this was the flaw of America, a nation of shortcuts. And yet, hidden beneath their words, the shadow of unease lingered. Some of the younger POWs, barely out of school before they were shipped into war, glanced at the folded blades with quiet curiosity. They remembered the faces of the guards, not flustered by ridicule, not embarrassed, but patient, as if waiting for time itself to answer the laughter. Inside the barracks, the murmurs slowed, pride echoing like a shield raised against doubt. Tradition, they told themselves, was their anchor, and tomorrow, when earth met steel, the truth would prove itself, or so they believed. Morning broke with the hiss of dew steaming off the campyard ground, the heat of Texas already rising. Orders were given. Drainage ditches had to be dug along the perimeter after last night's storm. Muddy puddles gleamed in the grass, attracting swarms of mosquitoes. The task was ordinary, almost trivial, yet the prisoners sensed it carried the flavor of a challenge. U.S. guards and German POWs were handed shovels side by side. The contrast could not have been sharper. On one side, the long, heavy, iron-forged German tools, still sharp-edged even after years of war. On the other, the compact American folding shovels, their hinges clicking open with a metallic snap. To the POWs, it looked ridiculous, a parody of soldiering. A corporal whispered to his comrade, "Let us see how long before theirs bend like wire." The officers, arms folded, watched with sly smiles, their pride thick as armor. The first shovels bit into earth. The Germans leaned hard, driving their blades deep, their movements heavy, almost ceremonial. Soil clung stubbornly, demanding muscle, and the men grunted as they lifted and threw each mound. This was how they had always dug, with weight, with sweat, with the stubborn faith that strength alone conquered the ground. The Americans worked differently. Their blades, though short, cut with quick, precise strokes. They drove the sharpened edges at angles, prying and flipping clumps of soil with minimal effort. Their rhythm was strange, almost mechanical, as though the tool itself knew where to go. Within minutes, the trench lines revealed a story neither side had expected. The German POWs, drenched in sweat, were knee-deep in mud, their progress slow and labored. The Americans, moving with a steady tempo, had carved a path twice as long. The prisoners exchanged uneasy glances, their mocking confidence faltering. One POW, a young man from Hamburg, muttered through clenched teeth, They are moving faster." His voice was low, but it carried, and silence fell around him. The officers tried to mask their concern. A lieutenant snapped, "Do not be distracted. Keep digging." Yet his own eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt as he watched the Americans' trench stretch further with each passing minute. The campyard became a stage, the trenches the lines of a silent competition. The Americans said nothing. They dug, and the earth yielded. The Germans said everything, and the earth resisted. Pride was beginning to turn into something else, a creeping realization that this toy might not be a toy at all. By midday, the sun was merciless, the prisoners exhausted, their progress halved. Across the yard, the American guards leaned casually on their completed trench, blades glinting, watching as the Germans struggled on, for the first time since their capture. The prisoners felt the weight of ridicule pressing not from them, but upon them. The contest had not been intended, but it was underway, and it was not going as they had believed. The sound of metal biting earth carried across the campyard like a steady drum. The rhythm was unmistakable, sharp strokes, swift lifts, clean throws. Every minute widened the gap. The Germans, sweating under the weight of their long shovels, fought the clay as though locked in combat. The Americans, with their compact tools, seemed to glide through the soil, each motion effortless, economical. At first, the prisoners told themselves it was an illusion. Surely the guards were simply more accustomed to this Texan ground. Surely their own blades, forged in Europe, would prove stronger as the hours wore on. But the evidence grew undeniable. By the time the German ditch stretched a mere 10 meters, the Americans had cut nearly 20. One POW froze, leaning on his heavy shovel, his chest heaving. His eyes followed the line of the American trench, already twice as long. He muttered in disbelief. "In just minutes, they have gone twice as far as us." No one laughed. The earlier mockery now seemed hollow, echoing faintly in memory, like a joke that no longer made sense. The American tools revealed their secret with every strike. Their blades, shorter and lighter, sliced through the soil at angles the German shovels could not match. The sharp steel edges, tempered differently, sheared roots and clay instead of dragging them. The foldable handle allowed a closer grip, transferring power directly into the blade. It was not strength, but design, and design was winning. A sergeant from Bavaria, who once prided himself on his stamina, threw down a clump of soil and stared at his blistered palms. He remembered nights in Russia, hacking at frozen earth until his muscles shook. And yet here, in the relative peace of captivity, his body betrayed him. The thought gnawed at him. Could it be that this small, unimpressive tool is superior to ours? The guards gave no speeches, no boasts. They simply worked, their silence louder than words. The POWs glanced at one another, waiting for someone to break the tension with another joke. But no joke came. Pride, once loud, was now trapped behind clenched teeth. By late afternoon, the trenches stood like proof written in the earth. 2 lines, side by side, one short, uneven, carved by brute force, the other long, clean, carved by a tool once ridiculed. It was as though the soil itself had delivered judgment. The image lingered, sweat dripping from German brows, muscles trembling, while across the yard, Americans leaned on their folding shovels, blades flashing like mirrors in the sun. The reversal was complete, from laughter to silence, from scorn to doubt. And in that silence, the prisoners felt something heavier than exhaustion. They felt the weight of realization pressing down, as unyielding as the clay they could not master. That evening, after the trenches had been inspected and the guards dismissed the men back to their quarters, the barracks hummed with a different kind of noise. The laughter of the day before had vanished, replaced by whispers and uneasy glances. The American shovel had cut not only through soil, but through pride, leaving cracks where certainty once stood. A group of younger POWs sat on their bunks, turning the memory over like a wound they could not leave alone. One whispered, almost embarrassed. It dug twice as fast, and with half the effort. Another nodded, recalling the strange hinges, the way the handle folded neatly, the ease with which the blade bit into the ground. They were ashamed to admit respect, but silence made it worse, as if their very thoughts betrayed them. The officers sensed the change and tried to stamp it out. A lieutenant barked, "Do not be fooled by gadgets. German steel is superior. What they call efficiency is only compromise." His words carried authority, but not conviction. Even he had seen the trenches side by side. Even he had heard the rhythm of those American strokes. One prisoner, a carpenter before the war, shook his head. "It is not compromise. It is design." His voice was quiet, but it rippled through the room. The others fell silent. Knowing he had spoken the truth they dared not admit. It was not just about shovels. It was about ideology. For years, they had been told that German tradition, German craftsmanship, German discipline were unassailable. Now, in something as ordinary as digging a ditch, that myth had been wounded, and myths, once cracked, rarely heal. A sergeant tried to rally them. "We are soldiers. Tools mean nothing. Spirit decides the battle." But the men knew better. Spirit could not double the length of a trench in half the time. The barracks grew heavy with tension, pride clashing with doubt. Some men avoided eye contact, ashamed of their thoughts. Others clenched fists, determined not to yield even in their minds. But none could erase the image, the toy-like shovel biting deeper, faster, cleaner, for the first time. They began to wonder if the Americans built even their smallest tools this way. What of their machines, their weapons, their factories? What other truths had they dismissed as toys? And so, pride wrestled with silence. Each prisoner caught between loyalty to the past and an unsettling respect for the future. Viewers, let me ask you directly, if you had been in that barracks, would you have spoken the truth aloud or swallowed your words to preserve pride? And do you think pride helps men survive captivity, or does it blind them to lessons staring them in the face? Share your thoughts below. The next morning, work resumed. The camp was quieter, as if the very earth remembered the contest. German POWs filed out with their heavy shovels, shoulders bent, eyes lowered. The American guards unfolded their tools with the same practiced click, the hinge snapping into place like a clock striking the hour. But today, something subtle had changed. The Germans no longer laughed. The ditch work continued, but the tension eased in unexpected ways. During a break, a guard set his shovel aside and offered a tin of coffee to a prisoner whose hands were blistered raw. The German hesitated, then took it, sipping in silence. The bitterness of the brew, unfamiliar but warming, lingered on his tongue, around them. Other guards passed cigarettes, and for a fleeting moment, the trench became less a line of division and more a place of shared exhaustion. One of the strangest moments came when a black civilian laborer, contracted to assist the camp, approached the Germans. He watched their slow, clumsy motions and finally said in halting German, "Learned from work gangs in Detroit short strokes, use your body, not just your arms." He demonstrated, gripping the American shovel and prying the soil in swift bursts. The POWs stared, caught between prejudice and reluctant awe. Back home, their propaganda had painted men like him as inferior. Yet here, under the Texan sun, he showed them a skill that made their own labor easier. That evening, the barracks buzzed again, but this time not with mockery. Some men spoke quietly about how the guards had shared coffee. Others recalled the black worker's lesson. Admitting, though never too loudly, that his method had worked, the silence of the officers was louder than any reprimand. They could not forbid the men from feeling what they felt, the slow erosion of certainty. A private from Munich scribbled in his hidden diary, "It is strange. They give us small kindnesses, coffee, a cigarette, advice, and they have tools that work better than ours. We thought we were the masters, but perhaps we were blind." His words, never meant for others, captured the creeping shift in the prisoners' minds. Here was the cruel paradox of captivity. Humiliation softened by humanity, pride corroded by practicality. The German POWs were learning, day by day, that victory was not forged in tradition or appearances, but in design, in resourcefulness, in the quiet efficiency of even the smallest things. And so, beneath the surface of the camp, a silent transformation was underway. The soil was not the only thing being turned over. Hearts and thoughts were being broken open, reshaped, and unsettled. And, viewers, what do you think lasts longer, the sting of humiliation or the memory of unexpected kindness? And if you were in their place, would you cling to prejudice or allow a simple tool and a cup of coffee to shift your beliefs? Share your reflections below. Winter crept into the Texas camp with a sharp wind that whistled through the barbed wire. The days grew shorter, the soil harder, the air biting against every exposed hand. Work details continued, and once again the prisoners shouldered their heavy German shovels, while the guards unfolded their compact tools with a metallic snap that now carried no ridicule, only recognition. By then, the Germans no longer mocked. They had seen too much, dug too much, sweated too much beside men who worked twice as fast with half the weight. What once looked like a toy had become the symbol of a truth they could not escape. On the final day of ditch work that winter, the prisoners finished their lines and stood leaning on their shovels, exhausted, across the yard. The Americans rested too, their folding blades planted neatly in the soil. The contrast was striking. The long, heavy German tools, mud-caked and clumsy, beside the sleek, gleaming American ones, light yet enduring. One lieutenant, who months earlier had sneered, now stood silent. His men avoided his eyes. They all remembered his words. "We dug positions in Russia with real steel. Now, that boast hung hollow in the air." He pressed his lips together, lowered his gaze, and whispered to no one in particular, "We carved beauty, but they forged usefulness." Years later, when many of these prisoners had returned home and rebuilt their lives, the memory of the American shovel remained vivid. It became a private story told to sons and grandsons, a parable of practicality over pride. An elderly former POW once recalled, "I laughed at it the first day, then I saw it dig twice as fast. And in that moment, I knew why we lost." They did not waste time on appearances. They built what worked. The final image lingered in their minds, an American shovel planted upright in the earth, its blade catching the low sun, casting a shadow long and sharp across the camp yard. For the Germans, that shadow was more than a shape on the ground. It was the reminder that victory had not come from grandeur, but from simple, ruthless practicality. No words were spoken, none were needed. The truth was buried in the soil, in the trenches that told the story without boasting, without laughter, without pride, only silence. When the story of the war is told, it is often filled with the roar of tanks, the thunder of artillery, and the names of battles etched into maps and monuments. Yet history is also written in smaller, quieter details in the shape of a tool, in the rhythm of labor, in the silence that follows a realization. For the German prisoners who once scoffed at the American folding shovel, their humiliation was not delivered by bombs or bullets, but by something they never expected: the efficiency of a simple blade. This memory endured long after captivity. Decades later, in kitchens and gardens across Germany, old men would retell it, sometimes with bitterness, sometimes with a reluctant smile. They spoke of the shock of seeing a toy outperform their own proud steel, and of the moment they realized that America's power was not just in its vast armies or roaring factories, but in its ability to design the useful, the practical, and the efficient. A shovel became more than a tool. It became a lesson. There is a strange poetry in this, that a war fought with bombers and battleships could also be understood through the hinge of a folding spade. It reminds us that strength does not always lie in grandeur, but in the small details that make life and survival easier. It also reminds us how pride can blind, how laughter can turn to silence, and how even enemies can share a moment of recognition over the simplest of objects. Perhaps that is why one former POW confessed, late in life, that whenever he dug his garden, he still thought of that day in Texas when the ground itself taught him that victory belongs not to the proud, but to the practical.